Come to chapter 13, the host of Mara. The Pali for this reads, Yava kivanchame bhikkhave imesu chatusu aryasachesu evanti parivatang dvadasakarang yathabhutang jnanarasanang nasuvisutang ahosi nevatavahang bhikkhave sadevake loke samarake sabrahmake sasamana brahmaniya pachaya sadeva manusaya anuttarang samasambodhing abhisambudho pachanyasing, which translates as long bhikkhus as these Four Noble Truths in their 12 aspects were not clearly seen as they are, I did not declare to the world, with its devas, maras and brahmas, with its samanas and brahmins, its monarchs and ordinary folk, that I had realized the complete and perfect awakening. And in the illustration that goes with the text, you can see we've got our red and black dragons have returned to the scene, that are circling around, and at the center you've got the Buddha thoroughly crowded in, wedged in on all sides by various different entities, characters, and definitely a sense of pressure and attack coming from these various different figures. And Ajahn Sucitto will describe what these are about. You have these various different forms. You've got a sort of death's head here with a crown sitting on the back of a rooster with a lute or a veena, and on this side there's an old nasty-looking skinny fella with a snake, and then down at the bottom you've got a black fat-bellied pig with a baby riding on the back. So that's just a sort of surface level of imagery. So there's a lot going on here, and in the distance you have the blue sky and the open hills, but all around the Buddha you have this crowd of oppressive influences. And leaning over his shoulder, we've got these being, those of you are passing around the books, you can see leaning over the Buddha's shoulder you've got the haggard face of the old King Suddhodana, the Buddha's father, also having his say in the proceedings. So as long bhikkhus as these Four Noble Truths had not been realized, I did not declare that I had realized complete and perfect awakening. In other words, here the Buddha is telling the group of 5 that he didn't teach this until he had actually put it into practice himself. The Buddha has already penetrated the Four Truths in their 12 aspects. From that perspective, this picture looks back to what it was like before having had those realizations. It's also a portrayal of the problems that beset all contemplatives, bearing marked similarity to the spiritual ordeals of mystics of all religions. 2 intertwined serpents, representing desire and ignorance, completely encircle the center where the Bodhisattva is seated in meditation, surrounded by a provocative horde of demons and fellow humans. These 2 serpents form a screen that prevents the Bodhisattva from seeing the Four Noble Truths, represented by the 4 emblems in the corners of the square framing the inner circle. So you have in the corners here, again, and then the snakes are in their characteristic form of the plaited knotwork, so Celtic knotwork, and then also the Four Truths have also got this Celtic knotwork form of the Noble Truth of dukkha. You have Ajahn Sucitto's favoured motif of the skull, with threads weaving in between the eye sockets and the jaw, and then the dukkha samudaya, the origin of suffering, the cause of suffering being tanha, craving, there, and then the cessation of suffering being like an open eye form there, with a pale blue pupil, and then the 4th truth, that of the way, is a Dhamma wheel in the corner of this. So they have these 4 matching knots around the edges here. The center of the painting is congested. This represents the way difficulties of the mind seem to a sincere but unenlightened contemplative. Activating the aspiration to be free from attachments makes the mind more keenly aware of their presence and of the difficulties encountered in relinquishing them. It entails putting forth energy in ways that do not gratify the outflows of the mind. When the outflowing habits are no longer catered to, their unresolved energy starts to throw up a lot of fantasy, doubt, and longing. The instinctive flow of energy towards self-view creates ideas and feelings that are constantly seen in terms of self. Furthermore, the very process of outflow and attachment is identified with. One feels that one is an attached person. Is this the right path for me? I shouldn't have such doubts. I shouldn't repress doubts. Why am I a repressive person? And so on. These all contribute to the sense of self, which is an oppressive, congested feeling. Even a relatively insensitive person feels shut in when selfishness, self-consciousness, or any of the more developed creations of self-view are operating. A couple of things to reflect on that. Firstly, this opening statement, this is something that's echoed in other teachings of the Buddha, and he one particularly striking place where he says, because of not understanding, not realizing four things, both you and I and all living beings have wandered through samsara from birth to birth, from countless eons past. And those four things are dukkha, the origin of dukkha, the cessation of dukkha, and the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. It's a brief teaching, a brief sutta, but it's very striking that because of four things, you and me and all beings have been bound to this wheel of rebirth. And so that it's not just in this one instance that he says this, but this is the crucial insight. This is the insight, the understanding that makes all the difference. And when those four truths are understood, when those four qualities are really penetrated to and awakened to and fully understood, developed, then everything changes. Also, anybody who's familiar with Buddhist iconography, whether it's out of the southern Buddhist world, some countries like Sri Lanka or Thailand or Burma, Laos and Cambodia, or from the northern Buddhist world, countries like Tibet or China, Japan, Korea, when you have the depiction of the Buddha under the Bodhi tree or being assailed, being attacked by the forces of Mara, then usually you have the image of the Bodhisattva sitting under the tree, and then Mara's hordes are all a respectful distance away. And some of the actual stories define the scene in terms of the space under the tree as being sort of a protected zone, a kind of force field. And so the Bodhisattva is sitting under the tree, and even as the forces of Mara try to sort of get to him, they sort of hit the force field, and then the arrows that they fire at him turn into rays of light, or the rocks that they throw at him turn into flowers and sprinkle down to the ground. But Ajahn Sucitto has very deliberately chosen a different kind of imagery here, and a sense of crowdedness and cramped, congested, presence. It's not an accident that he's done it that way, but since he's trying to describe the experience, as he says, of the average contemplative, and there's this kind of chemistry that in particular that happens, whereby when you kind of make a resolution, okay, now I'm going to go on this retreat, or I'm really going to give my effort thoroughly to this, then it's like using an expression you'd say in English of throwing down the gauntlet. So for the people who don't have English as their first language, this might be a strange expression, but a gauntlet is an armored glove, the gloves that knights in armor back in the Middle Ages, that's the way they would wear to protect their hands. And if you were challenging someone to a duel, you take off your glove, your gauntlet, and you kind of whack the other person across the face with your glove, and then throw the glove down on the ground. And so then, if the other person is going to take up the challenge, they'd pick up the gauntlet and say, "Okay, you're on," and then you'd have a duel and fight. either to whoever was injured or whoever dies first. So that going on a retreat or saying, okay, I'm not gonna move from this spot until I realize total enlightenment, as the Buddha did. That's really throwing down the gauntlet to Mara. It's like, okay, I'm not going to move from this spot until perfect enlightenment is realized. Which, according to the stories, that was the resolution of the Buddha, and he reiterates that in his teachings in the words of the suttas as well. That was his resolution and his in a sense a primary quality of his, or the most powerful aspect of the paramitas, the 10 perfections, was that of resolution, or adhitthana. And so when you throw down the gauntlet, then you're asking for a fight, or you're asking for a challenge. And so then this imagery, then the forces of Mara come forth, and the forces are those, as he describes, of fantasy or doubt and longing, but they're often characterized in terms of greed, hatred, or delusion, so that the forces of desire, represented by the daughters of Mara, trying to attract the Buddha by arousing desire in him, and then the forces of fear, the sort of demon army of the yakas and monstrous elephants with 3 heads and 6 tusks and so on, and trying to frighten, create fear in the mind of the Buddha. And then that of delusion, often represented by the face of King Suddhodana, the Buddha's father, begging him to come back and be responsible and take over the family, take over the kingdom, the family business, and so that when one sits down to meditate, and particularly when you create that kind of a resolution, or see things in that very definitive way, then that in a way creates a reaction, so that mythologically it's depicted as the forces of Mara showing up, but it can also just be seen on a psychological level of saying, okay, I want to meet all my unfinished business. Any debts out there? I'm calling in all debts. And say, really? All of them? Okay, here it comes. And so that, okay, I'm calling it quits. I wanna invite all the debts that are outstanding. I'm going to pay them all off. And so then that it creates this sense of a meeting or an invitation for those qualities. And I'm sure Ajahn Sucitto will go into it more as we go along. But it's and as I've said before, just to reiterate, this is very much the mode of work in spiritual training, and the essence of forest monastic life. That there's a phrase or an aphorism, a saying that is very common in forest monasteries, which is that the practice is called the suffering that leads to the end of suffering. So it's not going to be a day at the beach. That you're not asking to just be pleased or comfortable or having things that are going to be pleasant, but you enter into that mode in order to be transformed, in order to change yourself. And so, as Luang Por Chah put it, when you enter into spiritual practice, then there's necessarily going to be friction and difficulty. But that very friction is exactly what helps you to wake up. So it's not like, I came to the monastery and, wow, I'm having all these desires, and I'm very anxious, and I'm irritated. I used to kind of like the nuns and monks, and now they really annoy me all the time. And all I can see is everything that's wrong with all the anagarikas, monks and the nuns. I have this whole list of their faults. I used to like them. How come once I've come to live with them, they're so awful? And I can't stand them. Yeah, I'm just making this up, by the way. So, but these are feelings, I would say, are not totally unknown to the Sangha. Also, lay people who come and say, I really need to kind of get my spiritual practice together. I'm gonna go and volunteer to be a lay manager, long-term lay resident at Amaravati, and really kind of put myself into spiritual training and be around really holy people. And then lo and behold, all those holy people you wanted to be with, like, he's like this and she's like that. Like, God, how can he do that? That's awful. You should be arrested for that kind of behavior. And then suddenly your mind is filled with anger and aversion. And then if we're wise, we'll take a step back from that and say, that's funny. Like 3 months ago, these were the most inspiring people in the world, and they're all my friends, and I love them. Now when I have to live with them, and I haven't got any other distractions, then my mind goes to all the things that are wrong with them, or getting very picky and particular and reactive around the people I'm with, or the tradition that I'm a part of. All the things that are wrong with Theravada Buddhism are just filling my vision. So this is the suffering that leads to the end of suffering. That you're, in a sense, it's important to understand, by shaving your head and putting on the robes, you're inviting the debts to come in. It's like, please, let me have it. Okay, I'm ready. And it's also important to understand that the voice that says, I'm ready, is not speaking for the whole committee. Because other members of the committee might say, I'm not ready for this, thank you very much. And as St. Augustine very famously put it, "Oh Lord, grant me purity, but not yet." And St. Augustine was one of these Christian ascetics who had, entering into monastic life with great sincerity, met up with the karmic results of a very wild youth. He was quite indulgent, the kind of real lad, as you'd say, sort of sex, drugs and rock and roll kind of a bloke of that era. And his great spiritual awakening, so they say, was when he was in a brothel, and he was set up with a young woman for the evening, and then discovered that she had a horrible sort of open cancerous wound, kind of suppurating wound, that on the sight of which his mind went into a deep shock, and he ran from the brothel screaming, or at least sweating profusely, and very distressed and upset. And then that sort of went to a monastery, and then because of the kind of mirror that held up to the path that he was on, but still all of the that karma of his laddish inclinations came back to him. And so that it was one of the things he's most famous for, in the Confessions of St. Augustine. He's talking about his struggles and spiritual difficulties that he had. So also St. Anthony, one of the very earliest Christian monastics, living off in the desert, going off to be a hermit in the desert. Okay, I'm going to go in the desert, be spiritual, give myself to the realization of the presence of God and so forth. And then there's many graphic and gloriously terrifying paintings of St. Anthony being assailed by the Christian version of the hordes of Mara out in the desert. So this is a familiar process, and one of the important things is to understand that when you put yourself in a spiritual situation, you sign up for a 10-day retreat. Oh, great, at last! Now I can really get down to my practice, and then this whole flood of doubts and fears and regrets and anger. You're ready to throttle the person who keeps putting their laundry all over the radiators in the retreat center. Doesn't he know that we don't want to smell his fuming underwear? And then you think, hang on a minute, I've never had homicidal thoughts about my fellow Amaravati supporters. And now here I am on a retreat, trying to be even more spiritual than usual, and I'm ready to murder this man because he puts his underwear on the radiators to dry. Curious. Where does that come from? So if we're wise, we'll ask that question, where's this coming from? Or what's the cause of this? If we're not wise, we'll just find ways to get the person to get thrown off the retreat, or at least hide their underwear from the radiators, and else leave nasty, sort of spiteful notes on top of the steaming underwear. So it's important to recognize that nothing is going wrong when you put yourself into a situation like signing up for a retreat or coming into a monastery. That nothing is going wrong, that this is the host of Mara shows up. In fact, it's showing that, okay, you're on the right track, and Also, Master Hua put it in a very, very neat way. He said that the Buddha Dharma arises from difficulty. The more difficult, the better. And so that that in exactly that way, that you're inviting those habits to be seen, and all of our addictions. And just like as mentioned before, when you're addicted to something like caffeine or alcohol or tobacco or sugar or affirmation, if you're addicted to anything, when the supply of your drug of choice is cut off, when you don't receive, there isn't any. All the tea is decaf. What? It's all decaf. Which I can relate to. One of a popular coffee mug in the States is death. It's got "death before decaf" written on it. So it's only decaf. What? Then at that moment, that's the opportunity to meet your the karmic results of your addictions. And so, just as when you want to get off the stuff, then there's a certain amount of withdrawal that is difficult. Then well, that's part of getting off the stuff is to meet the withdrawal symptoms, and that so much of the hordes of Mara is just the withdrawal symptoms from the addiction to bhava tanha, becoming, and vibhava tanha, the desire to become and the desire to get rid of. So, to carry on. The unenlightened practice is to smother one set of self-images with another. Drive oneself hard to prove that one isn't lazy. Be austere to prove that one isn't greedy. Be indulgent in order to be a more fun kind of person. Keep becoming somebody to suppress the doubts, guilts, and anxieties that are an inevitable feature of self-centered life. The mental congestion gets pretty dense. That's why the realization that there is suffering, idang dukkhaṃ, is such an important stage. The time for this realization ripens when the energy of the outflows has waned enough for the mind to recognize that there is a lot of stuff to be resolved. Some people haven't enough space to see that yet. The experience of the hindrances is not all bad news. It's a sign that the mind is bringing to light unawakened habits that need to be known insightfully. As it is taught in the Satipatthana Sutta, the first contemplation of Dhamma, of the way things are, is the contemplation of the 5 hindrances. These are sense desire, ill will, dullness, doubt, and restlessness. Contemplation of these is a matter of noticing their presence, their arising and passing, and what causes their arising and passing. With mindfulness, the mind can focus on how it is being pulled by desire or aversion, and see that desire hinges upon the need to gratify, defend, or annihilate the self. Hence the forces of greed, aversion, and delusion are always founded on self-view. So that the little opening sentence there, smothering one set of self-images with another, drive oneself hard to prove that one isn't lazy, be austere to prove that one isn't greedy, be indulgent in order to be a more fun kind of a person. So there's discussing the role of asceticism in our training. Talking with some Christian monks one time, they said, it's the guys who used to drink everybody under the table, when they come into the monastery, then they fast everybody under the table. So that when you're a lay person, you would be the one who could drink more than everybody else, and when you come into the monastery, you end up being the one who's more ascetic than everybody else. But there's still like the mind can still be fixated on me, the ascetic, rather than me, the supreme party animal. Although one can alleviate and dispel them in obvious ways, such as cultivating detachment, kindness, concentration, alertness, and investigative reflection, the hindrances always come back until self-view is abandoned. As long as one imagines that the personal realm of the 5 khandhas has to be something that one feels fulfilled by, there is always going to be the sense of need, uncertainty, disappointment, or even bitterness within that realm. To gain the dispassionate perspective that frees the mind from this view is a life's work, not necessarily because it takes a long time, but because it is strengthened by the variety of experience that a human life presents. All things, even the pleasant and commendable things that we think that we are or ought to be, must be released from ownership. Here, the image of the Buddha's life is again worthy of reflection. So that, and as Ajahn Chah would put it in a simple and direct way, he says, Buddha Dhamma teaches us to let go of the unwholesome, to let go of evil and to cultivate the good. Then it also teaches us to let go of the good. And similarly, he would say that we all want happiness and not suffering, but Buddha Dhamma also teaches us after we've acquired happiness, we need to let go of happiness as well, and that happiness and suffering are simply the two ends of the same snake. If we grasp the head of the snake, then that's like taking hold of suffering, and we get bitten immediately. It's painful, like ow, that hurts. I'm unhappy, and this is my problem. I want something, and I haven't got it. So that's being bitten by the head of the snake is attaching to suffering. Attaching to happiness, you'd say, is like taking hold of the tail of the snake. So at first, that doesn't bring any pain or any difficulties. The tail of the snake is just an ordinary feeling, but very quickly, any snake that's picked up is pretty soon going to whip around and bite you. And so that grasping happiness is it's not immediately painful, but it gets painful later on. Like I was giving the example a few weeks ago about the guy from Dartford who was this publican came, and he said the fellow who lives upstairs from the pub was a Tottenham Hotspur supporter. When Tottenham beat Chelsea at Chelsea's home football ground at Stamford Bridge, Tottenham beat Chelsea 5-3, then it was a very happy evening for his tenant. But he got totally plastered, extremely drunk, fell down the stairs and broke 3 ribs and punctured a lung. So attachment to happiness leading to suffering, grasping the tail of the snake. Yay, we beat the other guys, and then ending up in hospital with a punctured lung and several broken ribs. He's probably recovered by now, or recovering by now, but we can all have our own particular version. You say, well, football, who cares about football? But if we are thoughtful and we look at our own lives, we can see where we've attached to something that we got what we wanted, and something is pleasant and wished for, and then through the attachment to that, when it's taken away from us, or someone insults it, or it's broken, or we can't, we worry about how to keep hold of it, then we see, oh, because of this precious, beautiful thing, this wonderful thing that I've got, then I get upset and annoyed and hurt because of the sense of ownership of it. So then Ajahn Sucitto goes into the story of the Buddha's life and this image. The traditional image of the Bodhisattva attempting to realize awakening portrays him seated in meditation, beset by a whole horde of demonic forces and energies called the host of Mara. Mara, the demon, the figure of death, the deluder, appears frequently in the Pali Canon. Although he is generally presented as a separate entity, there is a strong suggestion that Mara is an aspect of one's own mind. This is backed up by the way that his host have names akin to the 7 deadly sins of medieval Christianity. It's the way that Mara speaks in the mind that gives him his deluding quality. Mara says things that appeal to the sense of self, like, "Take it easy, there's a nice palace in Kapilavatthu waiting for you, which is much more pleasant and useful than wasting your time here." Sometimes Mara is critical. "When are you going to face up to your responsibilities and get a decent job, instead of sitting under this Bodhi tree contemplating your navel? What kind of a bodhisattva are you with all these crazy thoughts going on in your mind?" And sometimes congratulatory. "Well, you're really enlightened now. You don't need to deal with this world of unawakened idiots." Mara is always persistent and cunning. "Okay, this is the voice of delusion, but it keeps on going on and you're never going to shake it off." Mara is the force that identifies us with conditions. The first thing that Mara attacks is the faith that there is a way and the confidence to keep practicing it. Without faith, the energy of aspiration dies. There's no mindfulness, no concentration, and no insight. So this is something that you find very distinctly portrayed in the teachings, that frequently Mara comes along to the Buddha, and it's, as he says, it's depicted in this kind of dialogue between two entities. That Mara comes along and says, when the Buddha's sitting up in the Himalayas practicing on meditation on his own, and the thought arises in his mind, I wonder if you could govern a country, if you could rule in a completely wholesome way. And then Mara appears and says, well, actually, now that you mention it, someone of your capacity, your skill, you could really do that. It's totally possible. You could govern your country and be a really good leader, be leading the country in a totally wholesome way. Absolutely no problem. And then the Buddha's response is always, I know you, Mara. Don't think that I don't know you, because I do. You've come here for your own ends. And then say, it's impossible to govern a country without imprisoning people, or seizing people's property, or executing people who are criminals, or waging war against your neighbors. If you govern a country, then there's necessarily going to be unskillful things that have to be done. And so then Mara, curses, foiled again. So the image of Mara in the suttas often comes across like a kind of comic villain, like the guy with the top hat and the curly moustache. Curses, foiled again, and then sweeps off to try another day. And so it is put forth in a kind of comedy, comic way, and yet it's also represent. And so sometimes people will sort of pin it down in that way, but that the Amara is just this external entity, this kind of demon that comes along. But Mara literally means death, like Amaravati means the deathless realm. Amara, or my name, Amaro, means deathless. Mara is death, Amara is deathless. So Mara is also a principle at work within our very physical being, and so it's the death principle of whether it's physical death or psychological death, and so that the voice of Mara is not just cannot be seen not just as an external entity, but it's also that the forces of desire and delusion and fear and aversion at work in our own mind. So the classical commentators would always say that the Buddha's mind was totally pure, no unskillful thought could arise in it, and so that's the sort of that's the commentarial version. But my own feeling is that when you have Mara displayed in this mode, it's describing thoughts that arise in the mind of the Buddha. That a thought arises, I wonder if you could govern it in a totally skillful way. That thought arises, but then it's immediately met. As it arises, it's met with wisdom that says, no, you could. It's completely impossible. But I feel it's more realistic that it's an actual thought arising in the mind of the Buddha, a deluded thought, or an angry thought, or a desirous thought, desire-filled thought. But it arises, but it's immediately met with wisdom, and it has no place to land. It can't get any traction. It can't delude the mind of the Buddha. So the awake, wise mind can experience feelings of desire, or aversion, or anger, or conceit, but there's no fuel for them. There's nothing to keep them alive. And I've often quoted Lumpur Dun in this, who was very, very well recognized as being an arahant and much respected elder forest monk, a disciple of Ajahn Mun. And when he was in his old age, one of his disciples asked him, Lumpur, can I ask you, it might seem impolite, but do you still experience anger? And he said, oh yes, but I don't receive it. And in the Thai language, it's like, you, damai ao. Like it shows up, but I don't accept it. Like a parcel comes for somebody at number 10 St Margaret's Lane. It's like, well, you've come to the wrong address, please, the parcel isn't for here, please take it somewhere else. You don't sign for it because it's not, you don't accept the delivery because it doesn't belong here. So I feel it's helpful to understand Mara in that way, and also that, as Ajahn Sucitto describes here very, very carefully, sometimes it's very obvious. When are you going to face up to your responsibilities, or why don't you take it easy? You don't need to get too uptight about the practice. Just put your feet up, and don't want to be attached to diligence or anything like that. Well, it's true. Maybe I don't want to try too hard, or those subtle kinds of doubts. This is the voice of Mara, but it keeps going on, and really, you're never going to shake it off. And I've had that kind of experience of that as well, where that's that voice in the mind that says, "Who do you think you are that you're ever going to get beyond this? I mean, come on, don't be stupid. I mean, really, you think that you're going to get beyond all this? Who are you kidding? Be realistic, please." So then it takes a bit of wisdom to say, thoughts arise and pass away. This is just a thought in the mind. Thoughts arise and pass away. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, but it's definitely impermanent. And then you can almost hear, "Ka! It's foiled again." Not that you can actually hear those words, but there's a definite feeling that can arise when you apply that insight. Yes, well, it may be true, absolutely. It could be totally valid. However, this is an impermanent thought that arises and passes away, and then you can almost feel it. You can't wriggle out of it like that. You're just trying to get away with it. Actually, you are totally guilty, and you're never going to get beyond this. Who do you think you are? Well, that also is a thought that arises and passes away. But if patiently, gently, steadily, then right there you've got the Buddha meeting Mara, the wisdom mind meeting that self-creating compulsion, and it can get very, very subtle and delusory, but that quality of patience, resolution, adhitthana, no, all that arises passes away. And I've often talked about a particular time, the first time I did a long retreat in the forest at Chithurst, my 10th reigns as a monk. And I've been here at Amaravati for about 2 or 3 years, and it was very, very sort of intense and hard work, a lot of engagement with activity and people for 2 or 3 years. And then I was given opportunity to have a 3-month retreat in the forest at Chithurst. So the first 3 days were this long exhalation of this is great. As the sun comes up, the sun goes down, walk to the house, get some food, walk back, eat, wash the bowl, sit, walk, bliss. Then on about the 4th day, So what's going on around here then? And then my mind started just hunting for anything to do or to be or to have or to get rid of or anything, and was really just seething, raging away, just trying to find something to be. It was like sort of bhava tanha plus. And just looking for something to desire, to hate, to regret, to fear, to anything. Just looking for some. I couldn't really see exactly what was going on at that time, but it was just this very intense feeling, and I couldn't believe how long each day was. It was quite amazing how much sort of churning the mind could do in the space of a day, because I wasn't seeing anybody. I just would walk to Chithurst house, just receive the food, walk back to the kuti and eat in the forest, and the other 23 and a half hours of the day it just was me and the walls of my kuti and the forest, and that was it. And so on after about a week or so of this, about the 10th or 12th day of the retreat, This was really raging away in my mind. And I just had washed my bowl after the meal, and I was outside the kuti, and even during some kind of practical task, you could find the mind churning away. And so then but all the time I kept saying, all thoughts arise and pass away and not self. But it would just make it all get more intense and stronger. And then finally, the flow of my thoughts went, these are real problems, and it's your responsibility to worry about them. And I'm never going to let you forget it, you bastard. So then I thought, this doesn't sound like the voice of wisdom. It's a very sort of distinct pattern of thought. These are real problems, it's your responsibility to worry about. And I'm never going to let you rest until you admit it, you bastard. I thought, I think you just revealed yourself, Mara. that was that kind of desperation to get some traction. Like, come on, believe me. And that sort of voiced itself in my thoughts in that way. So then recognizing, okay, that's not a voice to be trusted. Thoughts arise and pass away, feelings arise and pass away. Even if this is totally valid, it is something that's arising and passing away. It is changing. That I can be absolutely sure of. So you're not suppressing the thought, you're not believing in the thought, you're not denying the content might have some validity. But you can say, but for absolutely for sure, this thought arises and passes away. That's what's happening. And then, so you're taking, the mind is taking the position of wisdom, taking the position of the Buddha knowing. And then that continues to in a sense, that's taking refuge in Buddha. And then at that point, there's this I know you, Mara, quality. And then that is what causes that sort of self-creating urge to fade away. And obviously it goes away to gather its forces and learn how to get ready to fight another day. But at that moment, that's what wisdom defeats, that delusory urge, just like wisdom sees all that arises, passes away, and is not self. That's the fact. And something in the heart knows that. That's not a delusion, that's not wishful thinking. That is the fact. Even before a thought frames it, the heart knows that's the fact. And when that is trusted, when there's a real taking of refuge, then at that moment, like the light dispels the darkness, the Mara is intrinsically defeated. So just to read a little bit more. The enlightened response to this voice of Mara is to say, I know you, Mara. I know this is just a delusion. This is the unshakable confidence in the power of mindfulness that the Bodhisattva demonstrates by remaining cool and unmoving in the midst of the demon host. Even after his enlightenment, the Buddha was assailed by Mara. One example was when the Buddha had paced up and down in meditation for a great part of the night. The Buddha washed his feet, entered his hut, took up the lion's posture, lying down on the right side, placing one foot on the other, mindful, clearly aware, and attentive to the thought of getting up again. Then Mara, the evil one, approached and came into his presence, addressing him with these words, What? Do you sleep? For what reason do you sleep when the sun is risen? The Buddha's response, in slightly different words, was, I sleep, but there's no entanglement of craving in me. What, Mara, is there here for you? And then the footnote says, a rendition of the substance of Samyutta Nikaya in the Mara Samyutta, Sutta number 7. In this chapter, there are many other incidents of Mara trying to weaken the confidence of the Buddha. So that there's our connected discourses on Mara. The Mara Samyutta is in the beginning of the Samyutta Nikaya. The Buddha's response, I sleep, but there's no entanglement of craving in me. What, Mara, is there here for you? In other words, so what? I'm resting. What's it to you? Here Mara assumes the form of the nagging inner tyrant of the mind that is always ready to take the darkest view of our behavior. At other times, Mara's approach differs. Mara is not fussy as to how he chooses to entangle you with self-view. Mara can justify sensual indulgence as freedom to open to the sensory realm. He can call self-hatred being honest and firm. It's impossible to name all the constituent members of Mara's army, but the generals of the army have been identified as sense desire, boredom, hunger and thirst, craving, sloth, which is laziness or dullness, cowardice, doubt, obstinacy, worldly gain and fame, and conceit. So 10, the 10 generals of Mara's army are those. They're all psychological qualities. They have one thing in common: they all stampede the mind towards self-view through identification with sense data, kamasava, becoming, bhavasava, or denial of dukkha, avijjasava. So I'll leave it there before he goes into the description in detail of the painting. So this is a long chapter, multifaceted and detailed. So I'll stop there for the time being and open things up for any questions or things that could use some clarifying. Okay, very good. And continuing with the commentary on the host of Mara, and just to refresh the memory on this densely packed picture. I can't imagine that many of you can see it from here, but the books are circulating around. And but at the bottom here, you have this pot-bellied pig, very common in Southeast Asia. Very short-legged, usually quite contented-looking pigs, kind of rooting around in the villages. And it's got a baby sitting on its back. And then you have a skeleton here, almost like one of Terry Pratchett's images of death, with a crown around his head, with playing a veena or a mandolin or some kind of lute. And then over this side you've got the a kind of scrawny and nasty-looking old fella with a snake wrapped around his neck or appearing from behind him. So Ajahn Sucitto goes into description of this particular image. Here the hog is portrayed carrying a lot of books, so along with the baby there's books as well. These represent love of intellectual understanding. Intelligence can be deluding! ! People can become so enamored by ideas that they fail to notice whether these have any good effects. Ideas can be used to justify fanaticism and brutality towards other beings. Attachment to ideas can divorce people from direct experience where sensitivity, virtue, and peace are found. The thinking mind, if followed blindly, will make one feel that one is getting close to truth, here represented by the key that the skeletal figure on the left is proffering. But in fact, the thinking mind is merely fascinated with the feeling of knowing and having interesting thoughts buzzing in the mind. So delusion can be both an extremely intelligent yet ignorant quality, ignorant of the laws of cause and effect or of what is for the well-being of others. Filling one's mind with a lot of ideas can be one way of blocking out the awareness of how things are. So just that one point in itself is could be subject matter for an entire book or a library of books. There's a beautiful phrase that appears in one of T.S. Eliot's poems, which goes something like, "Where is the wisdom that is lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge that is lost in information?" And in a way sums up the information age as we experience it, and so that say emphasis that we have in our society and our conditioning, that if you've got, as long as you've got a lot of information, then you understand something. But even an intellectual understanding, that is not the same as wisdom. And the universities and the world is filled with extremely intelligent people. People who have lots of information and even lots of knowledge or intellectual understanding, but who have very little wisdom indeed. And I was having year before last, I was on a long hike through the Atlas Mountains with Stephen Batchelor, amongst other people, and we had quite a number of interesting discussions. Stephen's well known as a writer of Buddhist books and a kind of commentator and thinker, and is an old friend of the Sangha, as well as being something of an interesting critic of traditionalist views of things. But one of the interesting aspects of Stephen, even though he's known as a great intellectual, is that he never went to university. And discussing that whole realm with him, and also how people have sort of invited him to take up university courses or engage in the realm of intellectual discussion, writing academic papers, and so on and so forth. Well, it was very interesting to hear how his experience is very similar. When he's also a translator of many Buddhist texts, how the experience of being around academics, which he would be from time to time, is you might have two people who are very experienced Buddhist academics, and they're both experts on a particular field. There might be some very refined form of philosophy, like two different Sanskritists who are both experts in Nagarjuna, and Stephen did a translation of the verses called the verses from the center, a translation of Nagarjuna's Madhyamika Karika. And so the two academics who are both experts and discussing this extraordinarily refined and subtle, philosophy and wise, very profoundly wise principles embodied in Nagarjuna's teachings, but the two of them going at each other like two 8-year-olds in the playground, like, I'm right, you're wrong. No, I'm right, you're wrong. My philosophy's better than yours. No, mine's better than yours. And even though the content of the discussion is extremely lofty and refined philosophical principles relating to qualities of being and non-being, and neither being nor non-being, and so on, the emotional relationship is extremely childish, and also we both had found in looking at the academic world completely invisible, or the irony of that totally lost on the academics. So please excuse me if there's any academic philosophers here or theologians, but the fact that they are emotionally they are just attacking each other and wanting to prove their superiority, wanting to get their papers published, feeling jealous about somebody else getting a promotion or an appointment to a prestigious university, and completely unaware of that being the herd of elephants in the living room. That's what's driving their intent, is getting tenure at the university, or getting published in a prestigious journal, getting a fellowship at Oxford University or such like, and yet the subject matter of their expertise is this extraordinarily refined philosophy based on total non-attachment. So this is not just with Buddhist philosophers or academics. This is the case in so many different fields around the world, and the danger. And it's almost like the curse of intelligence and expertise is that you can make an incredibly good case for why you're right. You've got all the information, you've got all the sources, you've got all the quotations to back up why I'm right, you're wrong. And the attachment to your rightness becomes invisible because you can prove it, and the other person's an idiot. And so this is where it's extraordinarily deceptive. And going back to that whole theme of being right in fact but wrong in Dhamma is is something that Luang Por Chah nailed. I would suggest with extraordinary skill and accuracy, and in a way, sometimes it's a great advantage to not be so bright or not have such thorough information, to not have such an intellectual grasp, but just to be able to say, well, I don't know why it's wrong, but I just don't like it. Fine, great. You know that it's just a feeling, I don't like that idea, so I oppose it, but I don't know why, I just don't like it. And in a way that can be closer to the truth than having a whole slew of arguments and quotations to back up your own rightness. But also, just to say another poignant story, many years ago I went to spend, on a couple of occasions, I spent a week at Bedale's school in Hampshire. It's just very, very close to Chithurst, and we got friendly with the religious studies teacher, the theology teacher there, and he invited one of the monks to come and spend a week at Bedale's, and so I did that in 1980 and in 1982. And my job was not to go to any classes, but to go and sit under a tree in the middle of the school, the centre of the school. It's the first co-educational boarding school in Britain, and it's a very sort of liberal and say forward-thinking kind of place. And the curriculum used to be 1/3 academic subjects, 1/3 sport, and 1/3 outdoor work, all sort of arts and crafts and sport, and 1/3 outdoor work. And so that the kids actually used to have a whole farm, and they leveled the playing fields by hand with spades and shovels and such. So it was a very forward-thinking place. And so, as I said, my job was to go and sit under one of the apple trees in the middle of the school and just talk to whoever showed up. And I did that for a week. Very interesting thing to do. And one of the teachers who came and chatted with me was a young chemistry teacher, and he told me how he was very successful in his study of chemistry, and he was spending most of his time at the school, but then he was get pulled off during his holiday times to go off to the States and do various postgrad studies, and he was torn between these prestigious American universities trying to get him to go and do a PhD with them, or be there at Bedale School, which was this very sort of caring and fertile environment. But obviously, being a school teacher doesn't have anything like the prestige or the financial rewards of being a researcher at a top-notch university. So he said he one summer, a couple of years before, he had been apprenticed to Linus Pauling, who has a unique distinction of having 2 Nobel Prizes, a very famous chemist, and it was a great honor to be a young student working with Linus Pauling, and so that he said, well, it had a profound effect on him. Here is this man, absolutely the top of his profession, like most famous, well-known, highly respected chemist, 2 Nobel Prizes under his belt. And then what happened was that the woman who had been Linus Pauling's personal secretary committed suicide. She'd been with him for about 20 years, and she committed suicide. And he saw that the professor, Professor Pauling, was completely devastated by this, and that he saw, here's a man of extraordinary intellectual capacity and creativity, but on the emotional level, on the human level, he had no resources available to him. He just completely fell apart, according to the description that this fellow gave. Obviously, he cared about the person very deeply, but it shocked this young chemist very profoundly. I'd say, well, okay, I could go into the university, I could do all these studies, I could become highly accomplished, get a couple of Nobel Prizes, but if I'm in such a distraught and devastated state when one of life's tragedies happens, what's all that? What are all those glittering prizes worth? What's all that fame and prestige worth if, as a human being, I've got no foundation, no resources? So he said that's what really encouraged him to commit himself to working at the school and carrying on in the capacity where he was not just as a school teacher but also counselling the pupils and being in a way very much developing the human side and the that sort of well-rounded quality that working at the school and its spiritual ethic also brought him. So that was a very startling image that I remember. That was, well, it was 1980 or 82, so that's more than 30 years ago. So, but it still had a very profound impact on my mind, and seeing how, you know, the glittering prizes that people spend decades and work incredibly hard to try and get to the top of the heap, but then that can be a very lonely and insecure place. Also, maybe one last comment on this area that I felt was very pertinent was a number of years ago in the San Francisco Chronicles. The Chronicles got a very, very well-developed science section, and they had a whole long article about these two different groups of astronomers who were trying to make certain measurements about the expansion rate of the universe to determine absolutely once and for all whether the universe was going to expand forever or it was going to reach a limit and start collapsing. And these two groups, one was working, I think, in the South Pacific, and the other was working in South America. And they were interviewing one of the heads of these two projects, and they were again working at high intensity, trying to get the measurements and get the data and get published before the other people to get the final word on this particular issue. And this one researcher made this marvelous comment, I thought very insightful. He said, "They say gravity is the most powerful force in the universe, but I disagree. That gravity is not the most powerful force. Professional jealousy is." I thought, well, good for you, well done. So even if he didn't get the measurements first, he certainly got the credibility for taking a step back and seeing what he was in the middle of. So, to continue. The skeleton on the left is riding on the cockerel of greed. This skeleton has several sets of arms to suggest that some of the objects that greed can pick up. Several sets of arms to suggest some of the objects that greed can pick up. The most obvious one, represented by playing the lute, is the attachment to sweet and flowing sensations. Beautiful sounds are included, as well as all the things that stir the emotions. We like to feel aroused and think, maybe enlightenment is a permanently high state of sweetness and light. Another hand is offering the key of knowledge to the hog of delusion. Maybe, if we had more ideas and knowledge, we could develop a syncretic wisdom of the ancients and the moderns, psychotherapy, Kabbalah, Gnostic Christianity, Abhidhamma, Neoplatonism, Taoism. That would give us the sum total of enlightened knowledge. After all, we wouldn't want to be narrow-minded. With this approach, we tend to get confused and never bring up the kind of resolve needed to keep practicing any one of these ways through the highs and lows of inspiration and boredom. It's an eclectic kind of delusion. Notice the religious insignia on Mara's coat and the set of hands clasped in prayer. Greed can also affect our inclination towards spiritual experiences, insights and practices. We can want to saturate our minds with meditation techniques, arcane knowledge, ritual empowerment and devotional exercises and miss the point. This is known as spiritual materialism in the trade. Mara can make anything into a substitute for knowing how all phenomena really are. The telltale sign of Mara operating is that the mind has to keep active in order to sustain the fabricated quality of delusion. No matter how hard we try, we can never get enough. And the ignorant mind keeps wasting the opportunity to look at the very experience of not enough as being the first noble truth. Yet that looking is what turns practices and techniques into tools for liberation. It's only the ability to reflect on even religious phenomena as relative, conventional truth, not literally the absolute one and only, that brings the mind out of the spin of desire and ignorance. In this respect, and many of these these themes that he's pointing to here, that their second fetter, the second of the Sangyojanas, the first is self-view, Sakkaya Ditthi, the second is Silapata Paramasa, and that literally means something like Paramasa means to fondle or to take hold of, so Silapata Paramasa is the fondling of virtue, or the taking hold of conventions and forms and religious structures, and sort of grasping them, hugging them, and to in a way embedding one's mind in the particular forms and practices. So it's variously translated as attachment to rites and rituals, or conventions and precepts and practices. Can be just attachment to conventions, because also, even though the term specifically refers to spiritual rituals, like say purifying all your karma by bathing in the river Ganges, or say purification through consuming a wafer and drinking wine as the body and blood of Jesus, that the term, it can be expanded to be more inclusive. So Luang Por Chah would always talk about Silapata Paramasa as including things like the side of the road that you'd agree upon to drive, like it's a social convention, or money, that a piece of paper with certain ink patterns on it, say this is worth 10 baht, or this is worth 1,000 baht, or this is worth $100. These are also Silapata Paramasa, to think that piece of paper actually is £50, or actually is worth that. But actually British money is quite helpful, because it says, at least it used to say on it, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of £50 or £10. So it actually tells you this is an agreement. This piece of paper is signifying an agreement. That piece of paper in itself is not £50. It's an agreement between people. So just as, say, the side of the road that we drive on in this country is on the left, in Thailand it's on the left, in France it's on the right, Germany it's on the right. So which is the correct side of the road to drive on? Depends which country you're in. So Luang Por Chah would include all of those agreed upon conventions as being Silapata Paramasa, or things like fashion, what we call beautiful. And over the centuries, what we call beautiful, even in a single society, changes radically. And just we look at a photograph of people even 20 years ago, and we go, oh, look, that's so 80s. Or, not like us now, who are kind of, everything is good and cool how we are now, and things that are kind of cool and ordinary and good now. In 20 years' time, it's like, whoa, that's so 2015. I mean, can you believe it? So all of that would be under Silapata Paramasa, so that it would not just be religious issues, but that is a fetter insofar as that attachment of the mind to those things being intrinsically purifying, or intrinsically beautiful, or intrinsically valuable, and that the fetteredness, or the way it's a fetter or an obstacle, is that assumption of it being absolute, or being, say, part of the piece of paper itself, or the look itself, saying that is beautiful, that is ugly, and to say, well, that is purifying. Well, that's and to recognize Silapata Paramasa is to say, well, that's the convention, is bathing in the Ganga will purify your karma. That's the convention, and so on and so forth. And so that all of these, the things he's pointing to, these long list of religious structures, is, say, the taking hold of the skin and or the externals, and assuming that they are the essence itself. So Luang Por Chah would say it's like, and it's a very, very, very common issue that is addressed in his teachings, that he say it's like taking a banana, and you carefully peel the banana, then you eat the skin and throw the fruit away. Not only does it taste bad, but it'll give you indigestion, and there's no nourishment in it. But that's what people do. They take the skin of the religion, the rituals and the forms and the images, and and attach to that and miss what the images are pointing to, what the teachings are about. And so that if we're not careful and we accumulate a large variety, as he says here, you can work on the principle that more is better, and not wanting to exclude everything, you end up with this sort of psychotherapy, Kabbalah, Gnostic Christianity, Abhidhamma, Neoplatonism, Taoism. As a again, he was somewhat writing for a San Francisco Bay Area audience, but still you find a lot of the similar things in here in Britain, even today. So that that taking of the external forms and thinking this is intrinsically good, rather than what's this all pointing to, what's this all for, and where does this come from? And as he says, no matter how hard we try, we can never get enough, and the ignorant mind keeps wasting the opportunity to look at the very experience of not enough, and that the mind always going on to the next thing, that the Kabbalah hasn't worked, so you go on to Abhidhamma. Abhidhamma doesn't work, so then you go into jhana practice, and jhana practice doesn't work, so then you come to Amaravati. Amaravati doesn't work, so then you go off back to the Christians again. So it doesn't work, so you go for another variety, rather than looking at the not enough, or this doesn't work-ness, and using a particular form, not just dwelling on the external features, but using the teachings to point to the essence. And in another speaking of the key, another very compelling image that Lumpur Sumedho uses in one of his Dhamma talks is how the spiritual aspirant is like someone in a prison cell, and then the Buddha comes along and then gives you the key and says, "Here's the key to get out of your cell. Just put it in the lock, turn it, and you can go." And so then you say, "Oh, thank you so much. This is so wonderful. This is so helpful. How beautiful!" And you take the key, you hang it up on the wall, and you start bowing to it and praying to it. Say, "I'm so happy I got this key. This is so marvelous. This is so wonderful. This is the liberating key. Thank you, thank you, thank you." And you still don't put it in the lock and turn it to get out of the jail. And so that's a painfully common experience. It doesn't mean to say that we are dismissive of the conventions, or that we go and turn the Buddha image on its side, or use it as an ashtray, or such, just to sort of trying to let go of convention by defying convention. But the great skill is in using conventions to be able to understand the nature of conventions, and to help the mind awaken to that first noble truth. To continue. Coiling over the bodhisattva from his left side is the serpent of hatred, with a wrathful ascetic seated on its head. That's the skinny guy off on the upper left-hand corner. This kind of gnarled old wrathful ascetic up in the left there with a snake. There are many things that can irritate the mind and cause feelings of hatred to arise. Some of them are occupying the bottom right-hand corner of the picture. Figures involved in acts of violence. These are the grossest forms of mental defilements, lust and hatred, the things from which one recoils with the most horror. The ascetic figure up here is bashing them down, saying to the bodhisattva, "Why don't you do something about this? You've got to take steps to wipe all this out." And the bodhisattva is listening to that voice in the mind as hatred. Hatred of hatred, hatred of greed, or hatred of lust is itself an unskillful route. It's not that one should approve of or do nothing about evil, but one's actions to remove the demons must come from a positive aspiration rather than from hatred. Unless positive energies of wisdom and compassion are brought into the mind, negative states are created, and there's no end to it. So meditators are encouraged to practice listening to their grudges and wrathful indignation with a welcoming, calm mind. Having no negative feedback, the demons fade away. This can provide a foundation for right action with regard to working with other people's anger also. There's a well-known little story that the Buddha tells. It's in the, I think it's in the Sakka Samyutta, in the Samyutta Nikaya, about the king of the heaven of the 33 gods, Sakka, also known as Indra. So at a certain point, Indra was out doing something away from his palace, the Vejjayanta palace, and while Indra was away, then this kind of gnarly little demon showed up on the palace steps, came bounding up the steps, striding into the throne room, and then climbed up onto the throne and sat itself down there. So then the attendants and ministers of Indra then get very upset. Get off the throne! Get off the throne! You know, what do you think you're doing here? Don't you know this is Indra's throne, and he'll be very upset. And as they got angry and irritated by this little imp, then it got bigger, and then they got even more upset and said, "Look, you get out of here! You can't do that. That's the gross invasion of His Majesty's space, and no one should be touching that throne other than some senior devata. How dare you? How dare you?" And then the more angry they got, then the bigger the little pixie, the imp, got, and the more better looking. So after criticizing and blaming and getting upset and threatening this character, then before too long there's this kind of very large, powerful and good-looking demon occupying the throne and not saying anything. So at that point, as usually happens in these stories, then Indra returned to the palace, and then Buddha described how then the attendants, ministers came rushing out and said, "Oh, Your Majesty, it's terrible! This horrible demon came striding into the throne room and climbed up on the throne. It started out as this kind of ugly little pixie, but it's got bigger and bigger, and now it's this very large and very powerful looking yaka, this demon, but it won't say anything, and we don't know what to do, and it's really awful. I mean, please, Your Majesty, we're very upset. You shouldn't do this. This is so awful." All in a lather and upset. So then Lord Indra then just smiles and says, "Okay, fine, let me attend to this." And so comes into the throne room and says, "I'd like to welcome you to the Vejjayanta Palace, and I'm so glad you come to visit. Have any of my helpers offered you any refreshment?" And as soon as he starts to speak like that, then the demon starts shrinking. And then, as he's more gracious and friendly, he says, "Oh, please, haven't they offered you some fruit juice or a cup of tea or anything to eat?" Then it shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, and then by the time that the demon has shrunk down to the pocket size again, then Indra takes a little saucer and then scoots the demon inside it, and he puts a cover on it and says, "Please take it outside." And then you kind of take it out to the door and then shoo it away, and then everyone is amazed and startled, because no matter how upset and angry they got, it just seemed to have a negative effect, and the thing got more powerful and more dangerous and impressive. And so then Lord Indra waits for the buzz to die down and says, "You know what that was?" "No, Your Majesty, we don't." "That was an anger-eating demon." So this is a story the Buddha told. So whether it really happened or not, I leave for you to decide. But the Buddha tells it. But an anger-eating demon. So that is a very clear sort of little mythological tale that indicates that's what happens. As soon as you hate the demons and threaten them and get upset with them, then they get more powerful. But if you're polite and friendly, then and have loving kindness and compassion for them, then they tend to shrink and fade. Having no negative feedback, the demons fade away. Further within the circle are more personal images that might have haunted the Bodhisattva's mind. At the bottom, on the hog's back, is his son, Rahula. The name means fetter, or bond, crying out to his father. So Rahula can actually say, "My name is Bond." The figure astride the cockerel of greed is bringing up the memory of Siddhartha's wife, Yashodhara, beautiful, gentle, and devoted. How could he abandon them? Behind the Bodhisattva's right shoulder are the figures of his father, Suddhodana, and his stepmother, Mahapajapati. Suddhodana is offering the crown. Come home, son, and rule Kapilavatthu. I'm getting old. We need you. Meanwhile, on the Bodhisattva's left are his 5 samana colleagues, the 5 ascetics who were his friends. Some look shocked. Siddhartha has abandoned the path of asceticism. Some declaim him, saying, "You're all washed up, Siddhartha. You couldn't hack it as a prince, then you backed out of spiritual life too. Pah!" Notice that they are all convincing and are all personal. Their personal quality is what makes them convincing. The notion of boundless, timeless awakening doesn't have the same emotional impact as the image of being a comforting presence for your son in his formative years. Most of us take the personal world as reality and base our actions upon it, and yet Siddhartha had fully understood the personal realm. His early considerations were that all beings were subject to old age, sickness, and death. His leaving the family was an enactment of what was ultimately inevitable: separation from the loved. And it was undertaken for the sole reason of rigorous self-inquiry, the aspiration to find a truth that would set people free from the fear and despair of mortality. No matter how good a son, husband, or father Siddhartha would be, his family would experience suffering, aging, disappointment, separation, and death. Siddhartha himself was not secure from death. How could he accept the position of being a refuge to his family when he couldn't even be a refuge to himself? How could he be the leader of a group of spiritual seekers when he had no truth to follow? There's a footnote here that says, it's interesting to note that if Siddhartha had left home in order to fight for his country, our sense of moral indignation about him, quote, deserting his family, unquote, would not be aroused. We have accepted that it's a noble and honourable thing to fight the enemy, quote unquote, causing death, bitterness and grief, but not to fight the spiritual enemy, giving rise to wisdom, compassion, and an ethical path. We must also note that after his enlightenment, the Buddha did return to Kapilavatthu to give the teaching that brought many of his family to complete enlightenment. Again, there's a lot within this little section here, and so along with the forces of fear and desire that the Buddha is assailed by in the traditional armies of Mara, the desire of trying to be aroused by the daughters of Mara. Also in California, people were very insistent that we include the sons of Mara as well, because just in case the Buddha's the Bodhisattva's sexual orientation was of a varied nature. So whether they had sons and daughters of Mara or whoever, in terms of the forces of desire, and then the forces of fear in terms of the demon army, and then the forces of responsibility. So his former wife, his little child, Rahula, his dear old dad, come home, son. Kingdom's going to ruin since you left, your brother Nanda. Well, he's tall and good looking, but he's really, not up to it. He's just, you really could do such a great job, son. I mean, I understand what your motivation, but the firm is really just going to go totally down the tubes if you don't come back. No pressure, no. I'm not going to try to emotionally blackmail you, but the whole thing is really lost unless you come home. So many of us who've entered into monastic life have had that kind of input from our families. But also, it's I think Ajahn Sucitto's point in his footnote is extremely apposite, very, very pertinent, that if he'd stayed with the palace and gone off to war against the Kolians or the Magadhans or the other local tribes, and he'd gone off to fight, no one would think of him as deserting his family, even if he got killed on the battlefield or killed lots of other people. That wouldn't be deserting the family. You're sort of doing your bit to defend the country. But the Buddha, he was a warrior noble prince. He was trained as a military person. from the time he was a teenager till when he left the palace. He was a soldier. That was his life and his training. That's why when you read his teachings, you have so many military terms, like when the four most serious rules that we have as monks and nuns are called parajika, which means defeat. So if you break those rules, like taking the life of a human being, then parajika, you're defeated. It's a military term. You've been beaten in battle. Or the one of the epithets that the Buddha had was jina, which means conqueror. Like he was so those sort of military terms sort of linger on. And though I think it's a really important point that the Buddha was engaged in a campaign, but it was he was not deserting his family in order to sort of do something against his urge to protect and support, but rather it was doing it in order to fulfill that in the most complete way. And as he says, that after the Buddha's enlightenment, then he went back to Kapilavatthu and brought the teaching to his wife and to his child and to his family. And so many of the great figures of the Buddha's world and the Pali Canon, and who are our spiritual forebears, were the members of the Buddha's family. Like Mahapajapati, his aunt and stepmother, became the very first bhikkhuni, the very first nun. She was the cause of the start of the nuns' order. There were his cousins, like Nanda and Ananda and Devadatta, that all became Anuruddha, and the 7 Sakyan princes that all left and became his disciples. All, apart from Devadatta, became arahants. His son became an arahant. His former wife Yashodhara, she became an arahant. So he really protected them. Yeah. His dad is another story, which I'll get to at another time. But the principles that are being spoken about here, I think, are really very, very significant. It's also interesting that one of the groundbreaking representations of Buddhism in the West was the publication of The Light of Asia by Sir Edwin Arnold in about 1870, 1872, something like that. And he was the editor of the Daily Telegraph, that's establishment with a very large capital E. That's like the very much sort of conservative English establishment voice, the Daily Telegraph. So Sir Edwin Arnold wrote this poem, The Light of Asia, describing the life of the Buddha. He spends about 20 pages with the Bodhisattva in the palace, standing over the bed with Yashoda and the baby son, and trying to leave and going back, and trying to leave and going back, spelling out the sort of the moral torment of trying to decide to go or whether he should stay. Mainly for a Victorian audience, to help people understand it wasn't just that, oh, well, I'm getting forget this, I'm out of here, or the Victorian equivalent, enough, I must go. But rather the kind of back and forth, should I go, should I stay, should I go, should I stay? So he spends about 20 pages on that. Interestingly enough, the actual description of the Buddha's teaching career and what he taught is about 3 pages. But the moral dilemma of abandoning his wife and child to go off on a spiritual search gets a huge amount of page space. And it was very skillfully done, very astute judgment on behalf of Sir Edwin. And that poem had a huge effect on Victorian Britain, and was one of the reasons why we're here and Buddhism was so sort of accepted, because that was about 10 years before the Pali Text Society got founded, and before the first, and about the same time that the first Buddhist missions were active in London. There was from Japan, there was an ex-British or Irish military officer who came and gave lectures in London in the 1870s, 1880s, and he was the first sort of Buddhist teacher around in London. So that we're the inheritors of those very early Buddhist movements. But understanding of that decision and taking that to heart, I think is important for us to all to reflect upon. That when you're saying goodbye to the world, you've got to thoroughly know the world, or if your mind is intent on renunciation, that it's a renunciation that's based upon responsibility and connectedness, rather than just I had enough of that. I'm getting, I don't want to bother with that. That's not a basis of renunciation. That's a basis of dukkha. So maybe I'll leave it there for the time being. We've still got a few more pages of this chapter to go. It's densely packed material here. So if there's any particular thoughts or questions, reflections on what's covered today? Yes?
I was particularly struck with the bit about the forces of responsibility. When I first heard the story of the Buddha leaving his wife in China, I was very horrified. I do understand now the wisdom of the decision, and I quite see what Ajahn Sucitto is saying, but at the same time, it feels a little bit harsh still. Looking with hindsight, it's easy to see it was the right thing to do, but at the time it does seem very, very difficult thing to do. I've always wondered whether in those, 6 years between leaving his family and becoming enlightened, whether the Buddha suffered from remorse or guilt.
I'm sure, yeah. I think it was one of the most profound pulls upon his heart. That that it's spoken of in slightly stylized language. And he would say that the experience of the heart being oppressed by feelings and thoughts associated with the household life. So he didn't say I was missing my wife. You don't get the same kind of language, but it means the same kind of thing. And if you read Ajahn Chah speaking about that same kind of area, it's very interesting. He's very forthright. I forget exactly which talk it's in the collected teachings, but there's a certain point where he refers to somebody saying that, or making the suggestion that, it's easy for someone like him who could sort of walk into monastic life and enter into spiritual training and to achieve enlightenment without any big struggle. And he said, so if you say that kind of thing near me, you better not sit too close, otherwise you'll get a clap around the head. Because he said, do you think I don't have a heart? And it was a big struggle for him. And there was very, very poignantly, he talks about how he was engaged. He fell in love with a woman in the village, and the two of them were engaged. A woman called Jai, and that they fell in love with each other, and they wanted to get married, and that was being talked about. And then because of the economics, like the way that dowries worked in the village, that her family decided that she should get married to her cousin instead, because that way they wouldn't have to pay a dowry because it was the same family. So if she married her cousin Put, and Put was Ajahn Chah's best friend. And then there's this horrible day where he's out working in the fields, and his friend has to break it to him. And he said that that moment where his best friend comes up to him and says, I'm taking the girl, Chah. What can you do? And then, that was still close to him. He still had strong feelings for her. And it's his best buddy as well. And that even when he came back to Wat, and Wat Bapong got started, it was in the forest just outside his home village. then, as I understand it, then, and also when he became a monk, he was a monk in the village temple of that. So when Put and Jai got married, then he would see them together, and when he was going out on alms round, and they were offering alms food to the monks, and that was very painful, difficult for him. And so when he came back and started Wat Pah Pong, then I'm not sure of the details of it, but he was invited back to the village to start the forest monastery nearby, and I think for the first 4 or 5 years, then Jai made a point of not visiting the monastery, and then at a certain point after he'd been there for a few years, 5 or 6 years, then he gave the message to Put that it's safe for her to come here now. Don't worry about it. And then they over time they became very strong and devoted supporters of the monastery. But it was a great pull on his heart for a long time. And that if I'm not sure which talk it's in, but if you and he's really speaking very sincerely, you better not say that or imply that I don't have any feelings, because if you're sitting too close, you'll get a cloud. So it's I'm sure it was similar for the Buddha, especially having a newborn son, but also it reflects the sincerity of his search, and I think also that it wasn't Sir Edwin Arnold just putting a spin on it. I think it was probably very close to that. It was a real heart-wrenching decision to make, but then also knowing he was doing it for his family. And it's also very touching how when he went back to Kapilavatthu, and according to the stories, this isn't in the canon itself, but in the latest descriptions of it, when he went back to Kapilavatthu, then all of the Sakyan women from the palace came out to greet him and to pay their respects, but Yashoda didn't come out of the palace. And then the other court women say to her, well, he was your husband, and that we're all going to go and pay respects to him. He's this great, incredibly radiant and wise person now. And she says, if I have any virtue, anything worthwhile, he'll come and see me here. And he does. So he goes to see her at the palace, and then the other monks, Sariputta, Moggallana, and others, they're all a bit concerned about. Well, she was your wife, Venerable Sir. What should we do? Or how should it be if she wants to greet you? And what should she do, or what should she not do? And he said, she can greet me however she likes. So she has, even though he's a celibate monk, and the marriage is thereby over, she still holds a very special place in the Buddha's world. And so that obviously you can only go by the stories. I don't have the psychic powers to go back in time and watch it happening. But you could easily see that it worked that way. And also the Buddha saying she's in a different category. she gets the special privileges. So, and there's no discussion about that. Yes, Mariana. You have a question or just a...
my life was in a similar situation as Ajahn Chah, so I really reflect on that.
Okay, Nevin.
Yeah. The interesting journey I've been seeing with the book, because it's quite difficult. It's probably the most brushed over thing in Buddhism, I think. It's the two truths, because you've got this reality of appearance, mundane truth, and then often it goes too far the other way, this ultimate truth, the truth that the Buddha speaks in. The truly amazing thing, I don't know whether the Theravadas would agree with this, but it's the fact that both of these truths actually make one reality. In themselves, they're not in opposition, because the mundane, the everyday, you can't see the ultimate in itself, the absolute. So you have to see it in the everyday life. So they're two truths, but they're not in opposition. So the Buddha has this mind which sees more than one truth, but it makes one reality. And it's truly amazing, you know. And that's the path this book's slowly read, because Ajahn Sucitto seems to have gone at one point. You think he's almost gone too far with this ultimate reality, and then he pulls it back and says, but don't forget this. It's very, very beautiful, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, well, and it's a theme that I feel. I was talking about it before with the imagery of the Buddha's enlightenment, that he has to call forth the earth goddess Dharani to be his witness, and how that represents this. In my reading of it, how the Buddha both embodies this quality of so as long as his experience of enlightenment was just internal and was sort of dwelling on the ultimate, if you like, then Mara still didn't, on the conventional level, Mara didn't retreat. It was only when he acknowledged the conventional reality of calling the earth goddess to be his witness, which I take as being symbolic of recognizing the limitation of this body. Like, yes, this body needs to eat, it needs to breathe. It was born in Kapilavatthu, at least in Lumbini, and it comes from a family. There's the material world. Yes, there is the limitation. And then it was when the Buddha acknowledged the conventional truth as well as the ultimate truth, then Mara was defeated. On the conventional level, then Mara is defeated and is washed away by the flood from Dharani's hair. But until there is that acknowledgement of the limitations of the conventional world, then Mara is not conventionally defeated. So just the very term that the Buddha used for himself, Tathagata, I take that to refer to that very combination that you're describing. Both Tat Agata, meaning thus come, or Tathagata, thus gone. And as I've often said, over the centuries, people have debated endlessly about, is it thus gone or thus come? Is the Buddha totally here or totally gone? Is it Agata or Gata? Is it has he gone or has he come? Is he totally transcendent or totally immanent? And my theory is that the Buddha deliberately coined the word to reflect both qualities. That it's frustrating to the rational mind, but absolutely accurate in terms of truth. So that in the qualities of the Buddha that we recite, one of them is Vijja Charana Sampanno, which is we translate as impeccable in conduct and understanding. And the charana means activity or conduct. Vijja means awareness or knowing, so that the awareness is representing the transcendent side, and the charana is the conditioned side. So you have, right in that single word, Vijja Charana Sampanno, consummate or perfect in knowledge and conduct. So it's like the transcendent and the immanent are perfectly integrated with each other, and so that I feel is the essence of the middle way. And also just in seeing how someone like Luang Por Chah operated, that being around him, I couldn't understand Thai, but you could see, here was this monk who was a famously ferocious ascetic, incredibly powerful, say, abilities to endure discomfort and to live an austere life, and had malaria for 3 or 4 years without bothering to get it treated, just to investigate the feeling of having fevers every 3 days. Just to after he was paralyzed the doctors realized that he had major damage in one of his knees, and they said, "Oh, it must have been difficult for him to sit on the ground or receive people because this knee is really badly damaged." And they said, "He never said anything." And there was never any indication that he was in pain from one of his knees. But they said, "Oh yeah, it's quite badly messed up. It must have been really painful for him." None of his attendants, none of the monks closest to him had any clue. So here's this fellow who is extraordinarily able to be strict in the rules and enduring of the physical pains and difficulties of the material world. And yet he was, when you saw him and you're around him, you realize here's the happiest man on the planet. And so it was quite extraordinary to see that he was keeping all these rules and living this very austere life, and his time was totally taken up with people. I mean, people come and visit here at Amaravati, and I spend a lot of time receiving people. I say a lot of time, like maybe at breakfast for half an hour, after the meal, maybe from 12 o'clock. If it's this was really a long time, it'll be until about 2. An hour and a half, a couple of hours max. Here at the tea time, giving these readings for an hour. That's only like 3 or 4 hours in a day. He would see people from probably 10 in the morning till 10 at night, daily, or up to midnight, or beyond, every day. He had no such thing as a private life. Downtime. Didn't exist. And yet, he was completely unburdened and looked like the happiest bloke in the world. And so you could see, here's someone who's extremely strict, is totally devoted to the keeping the all the rules and the form of Theravada Buddhism, but he is absolutely unlimited by it. He's not limited by his body, by his personality, by his rules, but yet he's totally faithful to the tradition at the same time. And just seeing him operate like that, you'd think, I got as far as, how does he do that? How does he do that? And however he does it, I want to learn how to do that. And so that it's not just out of the myths of the ancient scriptures, but you can see this in the world around. There are people who manifest that same that middleness that is both a total acceptance of the limitations of the world and a total transcendence of them at the same time. And it's in this mysterious way. It's only when you totally accept the limitations of the world that they can be transcended. As soon as you're trying to dismiss it and say, "Oh, it's just worldly stuff, I don't even bother with it," or "It's just the conditioned world," then in that very dismissal, there's actually a grasping of the conditioned world. Because if it could intrude, you would then you'd need to repel it. But it's because the heart recognizes, how could the conditioned realm intrude upon what is ultimately real? How could it? So then it can be totally accepted. It's only if you're feeling it as intrusive or oppressive or burdensome, then you need to push it away and say it doesn't matter, or you don't need to bother, or it's annoying, or you don't need to do that. So it's in that I say is the exact embodiment of the middle way, and that's what the Buddha awakened to, was both a full attunement to nature and how it works, and a total disentanglement from it. So to carry on, I'll read the last paragraph again, just to remind people of where I got to. The insight into "there is suffering," quote unquote, begins to reveal the core of the existential problem of humanity, which arises from taking the 5 khandhas as an identity. Desire systems issue forth from that false assumption, wanting to have something, be something, or get away from something. wanting someone else to be or not be something. All that arises out of self-view is dukkha. Mara is always right there, saying that dukkha can only be shifted by changing the circumstances. Then, if you change the circumstances, Mara says, everything will be all right. Siddhartha will be perfectly happy. Suddhodana will be perfectly happy. Yashodhara will be happy, and Rahula will be happy. Mara makes you forget that the personality realm is unsatisfying and changeable, that it can't be a haven of bliss, even with a good measure of cosmetics and distraction. So this is an approach to spiritual practice. Ajahn Punadhammo from Arrow River Hermitage in Canada, he refers to this approach as rearranging the furniture on the deck of the Titanic. So yes, you can put that bench over there, and you can have a couple of deck chairs on this side, and you can have the band playing this tune rather than that tune, but you are on the Titanic, and the ship is going down. So, but I think this Ajahn Sucitto phrases it very well here. Mara is always right there, saying dukkha can only be shifted by changing the circumstances. So, when we're dissatisfied with one particular project or interest or relationship or place, then the mind goes to another one, a new piece of music to put on and listen to, or a new restaurant to try out, or a resource of whatever our particular favoured form of gratification is. It's just either repeating our old favourites that gives us a sense of home and belonging, or the search for something fresh and new and different. That quality of dukkha being relieved by the next thing and the promise of the next thing, and so that and within that and seeing that as the limit of how dukkha can be dispelled, then the mind stops looking beyond that, because of and within that, the more capacity that we have, the more money we have, the more personal freedom we have, the more the illusion of control over our circumstances, the more you can change the objects, the more you can get what you like, you can get your favorite stuff over and over again. And as long as the supply of what you want is uninterrupted, then everything's fine. But as long as we sort of keep the flow going for most people, but then sooner or later boredom sets in, or a restlessness, or the heart just says, "Is this it? Is this all there is?" And that basic dissatisfaction starts leaking through, and that the more the mind is deluded, the more it'll stay content with its array of addictions. But the more wisdom there is in the mixture, then, or the more broke we are, the less capacity that we have to get the stuff that we want, or to keep hold of the things that we like, then that unsatisfactoriness reveals itself more clearly. And in one of the earlier readings, I was recounting this very, very useful teaching where the Buddha says suffering ripens in one of two ways, either in further suffering or in search. And so that in terms of the description of the wheel of becoming, the bhava chakra, also known as the cycle of dependent origination, that when the experience of dukkha has ripened, then it either leads to more ignorance, going avijja, paccaya, sankhara, ignorance, conditions, formations, and so on, and around the wheel goes again, or at that point the dukkha leads off the wheel, and so that when it says suffering ripens in search, it means rather than looking for a new sense object, a new project, a new set of ideas, or just trying to switch off and not feel, the mind instead considers that there must be a way out of this. There must be a different way of being, rather than just endlessly chasing the next object, or the different forms of comfort and gratification and reassurance. That there's got to be a way out of this. This can't be the whole story. So in a sense, that's listening to the voice of the heart, and that's what we call suffering giving rise to faith, to that sense of this can't be the whole story. Or in terms of addictions, it must be possible to be free of this addiction. Freedom must be say something that's conceivable. It's something that's possible because I acquired this addiction to tobacco or sugar or affirmation or alcohol or whatever it might be. Therefore, it must be freed. It must be possible to be free of that. And wouldn't that be a fine thing to not have to be dependent on having this input of the drug, either chemical or psychological, that we've become dependent on? So that is where there's enough wisdom in the system that the dukkha is seen, and that the sense of there's a possibility to transcend it is apparent. When there is not enough wisdom in the system, then we just keep looking for the next thing. We keep just carrying on in the same old cycles, and in a sense, the more comfortable and the more efficient the system of gratification is, then ultimately the more depressing it can be. And it's one of those interesting things that the most comfortable and safe societies often have the highest levels of alcoholism and depression and suicide. So in countries, Scandinavian countries or places like New Zealand, we're known for their sort of political and social stability and cradle to grave care, and can bring forth enormous quantities of depression, alcoholism, and suicide amongst the people in the population, because there's the worthlessness or the pointlessness of just going around and around in these patterns of minor gratification. Seems to the heart completely unsatisfying and worthless. As Ajahn Sucitto puts it here, Mara makes you forget that the personality realm is unsatisfying and changeable, that it can't be a haven of bliss, even with a good measure of cosmetics and distraction. Even those of us who are not intent on complete awakening, but just want a little more peace of mind, need to know about the host of Mara. Whenever one is meditating, a quite responsible and reasonable idea will come along and start to poke. The lawn needs cutting, you know. I really should get out and cut that lawn. Am I just being irresponsible by sitting here meditating? After all, the lawn does need cutting. Maybe the lawn does need cutting, but does it have to happen right at this minute? But the voice of Mara goes on and says, well, I can't really practice now anyway with that on my mind. Mow the lawn now, then I'll meditate later. Once we begin, we find that there are endless numbers of things that we ought to do. If we believe it, we find ourselves caught in the spin. And Mara says, well, I'm too agitated to meditate now anyway. Maybe I'll just relax for a while. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe when I retire. When we reinforce these habits of mind, we establish that the conditions required for meditation are of being calm and having nothing going on in the mind. So we miss the opportunity to insightfully investigate the thoughts and drives that really affect us, the very ones that need to be understood. Game, set, and match to Mara. Speaking of tennis, so that there's a very charming and accurate depiction of by the Buddha in one of the discourses in the Digha Nikaya. The long discourse is called the Sigala Sutta. It's advice to a layperson called Sigala, and he's saying how a deluded layperson thinks, and it also applies to monastics, of course. It's too hot to meditate, or it's too cold to meditate, or I'm too hungry to meditate, or I'm too full to meditate, or it's too early to meditate, or it's too late to meditate. And this long list of all the reasons why it's not the right time to practice, and that if we're unwise, then we'll always be putting it off because things are never quite exactly as we would wish. Sometimes you come on a retreat. It's more the case in the States than here, but sometimes I'd be invited to lead a meditation retreat, and I'd show up and get things set up in the shrine room on the first afternoon, and some people have come in with this entire kind of campsite of their sitting gear, like a giant beanbag or a sort of reclining lawn chair, Really, I mean, it's, we can chuckle, but I kid you not, absolutely guaranteed to be able to meditate with no suffering. And then you have to try and break it to the people, saying, well, having your lawn chair in the middle of the shrine room is really not acceptable and not appropriate. And then, how dare you? And then, of course, people not seeing that their angry feeling about you saying you can't use that in the shrine room there's dukkha right there that is to be investigated. But we create this idea, and this is something that, again, if any of you have read or listened to many of Luang Por Chah's Dhamma talks, over and over again he speaks about this, or this is a theme that comes up where people are saying, oh, Luang Por, I'm so busy with my job and the kids and the farm and I'm a school teacher, the work never stops, and I haven't got time to meditate. And he would always say things like, well, do you have time to eat, or do you have time to breathe? And very pointedly, day after day, week after week, year after year, pointing out that practice doesn't depend on having a comfortable body, no noise, no people around you, no activities going on, but he would say you can suffer in every posture, therefore you can practice in every posture. Whether you're sitting, standing, walking, or lying down, then you practice with that. He said if you're sick, then you practice with sickness. If it's noisy, then you practice with noise. The very thing that you're experiencing is what you practice with. And so an easy way of rendering it in English is that those things are not in the way, they are the way. Stick that on your fridge. Those of you who have refrigerators. So but that's it's easy to blame the conditions. Oh, I've got this awful headache, or I've got this knee problem, I can't practice, or there's so much noise going on, I can't practice. But it was a real campaign of Luang Por Chah's to break that wrong view and say, no, if you think that, you make it true. If you don't think it, it's not true. But look, and to see how even, and as I was mentioning the other day, he had malaria for many rounds of malaria, but he didn't even bother taking any medicine for it for 3 or 4 years, and so he was having these intense fevers every 3 days, even to the point where at certain times he was sure he was going to die, and the sanghas are all gathered around him, waiting to see whether he's going to come out of his fever or not. But he would continue just practicing with it and to explore the feelings of it, rather than thinking, I have to wait till the malaria is over, or I have to go to the hospital first, get cured, then I can practice. So you might think that's a bit extreme, having malaria and not getting it treated, but as Luang Por said in that same reading, what's the point what's the point of doing things that are easy? So he liked to challenge himself, and that in a way the central theme of the forest monastery life and the way of what we call the Dhutanga practice, or using austere practices, is in a way challenging those habits. So I've got to have it this way, I've got to have this kind of food, or I've got to have this kind of environment, or this kind of temperature, or these kind of clothes, or this kind of quietness. And the use of the Dhutanga practices, like just eating once a day, or only eating the foods you get on the alms round, or never lying down, or the various different Dhutangas that we are allowed in the monastic training, that they are fundamentally to develop a quality of simplicity, and that what you can think of as being adaptable, like a robust attitude of mind. So if it's hot, you're okay. If it's cold, you're okay. If you're comfortable, it's okay. If you're uncomfortable, it's okay. That you're developing that sense of independence of circumstance. And so the Dhutangas that the Buddha allowed, there's 13 that we're allowed to practice. They're all, so he didn't allow you to do things like stand on one leg for 5 years, or only eat cow dung, or something like that other ascetics of his time would do, and still do today. But things like just eating all your food together in one bowl, or only eating one time in the day, or just eating the food that's given to you on alms round, or not lying down to sleep, or just using robes made out of thrown away cloth. So they're aimed at these very primal, what you can call the reptile brain instincts about food, sleep, shelter, personal space, that are sort of non-conceptual emotional patterns that we can experience, and by learning to be adaptable and to live as simply as possible with regards to food, sleep, shelter, and so on, then you develop an extraordinary adaptability, a kind of ease, and it's pointing at exactly this same principle, that you're not having to wait for the perfect conditions or depend on perfect conditions. You're, in a sense, by taking on those practices, you're deliberately not chasing the perfect conditions. You're choosing imperfect conditions in order to develop that strength or that adaptability. So, but for insight, one doesn't need to experience a great deal of calm or have lofty thoughts. Insight is based on looking into the way it is now. The more convincing and habitual the mood is, the less it should be heedlessly followed. Okay? Get that one? It's a very important point. The more convincing and habitual the mood is, the less it should be heedlessly followed. So, if your mind always moves towards complaining and grumbling, or the mind moves towards self-criticism, then the less it should be heedlessly followed. Therefore, okay, every time the mind gets self-critical, notice that. Don't let it run down that path. You know this is just a thought, or that the mind is obsessed with some particular kind of gratification, that you there's something that you like and you want and you're always looking for. To say, okay, that's the habit of mind. I like that. I want that. I follow that. Okay, make sure you got the flag ready to be lifted up as soon as the mind heads down that track. Okay, I know where this goes. This is just a desire. That's what this is. The ordinary, unquestioned habits and assumptions are the very ones that we need to see as impermanent, coming from conditioning and not from a fundamental self. Otherwise, meditation becomes an irrelevant and fruitless hobby. So, in this respect, just as he says, ordinary, unquestioned habits. So, well, that's attractive, that's good, that is interesting, or that's awful, that's bad, that's wrong. You know, noise outside the shrine room is bad, or food is good, sexual desire is good. The mind says, oh, that's someone that's attractive, or that's someone that's annoying. And then the rational mind goes, yeah, but they are annoying. Or they are attractive. That person, they are attractive. Trying to be honest and practical. But this is pointing to, ordinary, unquestioned habits. What's attractive to one person is insignificant or invisible or unattractive to others. That's the way it is. What we think of as say, delicious in food, or as good food, you have 10,000 different opinions about what good food is. And as I was talking the other day about this, I was corrected by Anagarico Piero. It's orthorexia was the obsession with healthy eating. It is now being considered a kind of mental illness, or something that is say subject to therapy. That you can have an unhealthy fixation and obsession with healthy eating, orthorexia. Like anorexia is eating little, orthorexia is so eating properly, quote unquote. And that unquestioned habit, this is awful, that is bad, it shouldn't be that way, or this is good, that is attractive, to say, well, hang on a minute, I'm attracted to that person, but if I was a spider, there wouldn't be that effect, because if I was a spider, humans would not be attractive. I might want to bite them to eat their blood or their skin cells, but there'll be no sexual interest. But the mind say, yeah, but they are attractive. Well, that's because of conditioning. It's not intrinsically there. As the saying goes, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Or like food, even foods that we are, say, particularly fond of, something that really the mind, yeah, well, that's my favorite thing. If you're already full, or maybe if you've already eaten too much, then even your favorite thing, you can see it and you think, ugh. And it's off-putting. Or if you're ill, if you have a nausea, you're feeling sickly, even something that normally you really like, just the sight of it or the smell of it, oof. So, is it good food? Is it your favorite thing at that moment? No. So it's to reflect on those ordinary, unquestioned habits. That the meditation and the development of insight is around seeing those kind of judgments and challenging them. Of course, if the lawn does need cutting, there's a time for this. But recognize that there are always responsibilities and things to do, and many of them are based on good reasons. Then consider whether it will ever stop, and can it ever be done? I mean, can the lawn ever be finally cut? As soon as it's cut, it starts growing again. In fact, even as you're cutting it, it's growing. Starts growing again, then you're back to mowing the lawn. Is one's life going to be a round of cutting lawns? Is this what you're born for? To work for the welfare of all lawns, or the garden, or washing the car, fixing the house, walking the dog, and so on? Maybe one should consider more clearly the amount of responsibilities that are undertaken and their purpose. There has to be an ability to look steadily at the compulsive drives within oneself and question their validity. There's a great little dialogue between two of the Sakyan princes when one of them has become inspired by the Buddha's teaching, and he's trying to persuade his brother to also become, he wants to become a monk, and he's trying to persuade his brother that it's a really great idea. And he's saying, well, yeah, it's a great idea, it's very inspiring, but maybe we should wait until after the rice is planted. And then he said, well, and then after the rice is planted, are you not going to say, well, better wait till the rice is grown? And then aren't you going to, if we wait till when the rice is grown, aren't you going to then say, well, wait till the rice is harvested? And then when the rice is harvested, then isn't it going to be that, well, we should wait till the threshing has been done and the rice has been stored? And once the rice has been stored, then you'll think, well, shouldn't we plough the ground and prepare things for next year's harvest? And so that and then by that time you come to the same period of the following year. So does it ever end? Does it ever come to a conclusion? Is there ever going to be a time when all the work is finished, and then the brother says, "Okay, enough," and I think it was Badiya and Anuruddha. I think it was those two discussing that, and that he's finally convinced. Okay, the work never finishes; it's never done, and so waiting until it's done before going forth is pointless. So they both go to the Buddha and ask for ordination. So maybe one should consider more clearly the amount of responsibilities that are undertaken and their purpose. There has to be an ability to look steadily at the compulsive drives within oneself and to question their validity. Not that we should blindly reject social responsibilities. They help us check whether our intention is to get away from something, which we can never do anyway, or to get to some pleasant, comfortable space. Any trace of self-interest will always bring up greed, rejection, or delusion. However, complete enlightenment is a higher goal and more fruitful for all beings than that of being a good person in conventional terms. So say looking at the amount of responsibilities that are undertaken, there's a little line in the Metta Sutta that people are familiar with probably: unburdened by duties and frugal in their ways, like trying to live responsibly, but also not just taking on stuff to keep ourselves busy, trying to kill time and keep ourselves occupied. And it's really interesting the number of times in ordinary conversation it's taken for granted. It's like, oh yeah, it's very nice. It takes up time. I enjoy doing that. Yeah, it kills a few hours. Yeah, And that spiritually, that should jump off the page out and say, well, you're trying to just pass the time. You're trying to sort of kill some hours just to get through a day. You're trying to waste time. Really? And yet it's so normal and so ordinary for us. And there's probably one or two of us thinking, yes. But isn't that strange that we should actually be happy about finding something that helps to make some hours pass, and so we don't have to be with our own mind? These restless, distracting hindrances are what the host of Mara are about. They make us think that the real world is the world of sense data, becoming, and self-view. So kamasava, bhavasava, avijjasava, the world of the outflows. The aim of insight is to practice in the presence of the host of Mara without suffering. Instead of feeling alarmed, ashamed, or infatuated by their presence, one develops the ability to dispel them temporarily. That gives rise to an understanding that they're visitors and not self. With this confidence, undistracted energy arises in the mind, and with that, zest and joy. Such spiritual factors lead to the full awakening of the mind, to true peace. Then the need for position and states of being, or the rejection of the sense realm, all that which is the expression of the outflows, can be abolished. So that need or that dependency for our sort of defining ourselves as being something or being somebody or being judged as, and also not sort of just in terms of pride or like, oh, I'm a doctor or I'm a teacher or I've published a dozen books, but also our achievements and our sense of identity can also be around our failures. You know, I know one fellow who used to introduce himself as a failed Buddhist. That's his favoured identity. Hello, my name's Peter. I'm a failed Buddhist. So it can also be the things that we identify with as all the stuff that we've got wrong and that we've failed at or that we never quite achieved, or like, well, I wanted to be a doctor, but I never quite, or whatever. So it's not just an identity formed around our collection of things you put on a curriculum vitae, on a sort of list of accomplishments, but it can also be all the list of our things that we've got wrong or that we failed at or that we we never really got, grows up very high in the ranks or in the company, or we never had any children, or the things that we feel like we're lacking or we failed at. In some respects, they're even more reliable fuel for identity than the kind of standard achievements. Then again, Ajahn Sucitto is talking about the illustration here. Notice how the forces of Mara completely hem in the Bodhisattva, yet the Bodhisattva is sitting quite coolly, serene and peaceful, not trying to push away, reject, or run away from them. The Bodhisattva is listening, turning his eye inwards, alert and upright to the way things are, to the pain and the sounds of the world, the belief, despair and hope of it. And he's remaining on one spot, the place of knowing. When he has fully awakened, there will be no Siddhata, no Kapilavatthu, no Bodhisattva, and no self in the realm of birth and death, only the awakened purity. Hereafter he will be called Buddha, the one who knows the way it is. So from that time, after the Buddha's enlightenment, as he says here, was not known as Siddhartha Gautama, or his personal name was never used anymore, but he was always known as the Buddha, or as the Bhagavan, the Blessed One. He referred to himself as Tathagata, thus come, thus gone one. And this word Buddha that is so familiar to us, there's a particular instance where in the teachings where it's defined about how that was used, and it's a time when the Buddha was sitting by the roadside or near the roadside under a tree, and a Brahmin who was traveling along the road saw him in the distance and was very impressed by this very alert and peaceful, radiant being sitting off under a tree away from the side of the road. So he he followed and he saw the footprints of the Buddha through the dust, and followed them up, and then found him, and then kneeling in front of him, he spoke and asked him, and because there was this extraordinary sort of serene and radiant quality to the Buddha's presence, then the Brahmin, who's called Dona, said, "Are you excuse me, if you don't mind me asking, but are you a Devata?" And he said, "No, no, I'm not Brahmin." Are you a Brahma god? "No, I'm not." Are you a spirit, a tree deva? "No, I'm not." Are you a yaka or a celestial demon? "No, I'm not." Are you a human being? "No, I'm not." And then he said, "Well, if you're none of these things, then what are you?" And then he says, "Brahmin, you should know me as one who is awakened, Buddho, one who is awakened." And so that is one particular instance where the Buddha uses that word, and it's probably not just from that one exchange that the title got formed, but it's certainly that's in a way an important principle, that he stopped seeing himself or referring to himself in ordinary human terms. And there's another exchange, a couple of exchanges with different monks, with a monk called Anuradha and another one called Yamaka. So Anuradha, he was a young monk, and then he's approached by these wanderers from a different group, and they ask him about the Buddha's theories, his teacher's theories, or his words about what happens to an enlightened being after the death of the body. And then they say, after an arahant passes away, do they exist? Do they not exist? Do they both exist and not exist, or do they neither exist nor not exist? And to all of those, the Anuradha responds, the Tathagata is defined outside of those four categories. So the Tathagata defines himself outside of those four categories. So then they say, well, you must be ignorant or a newly ordained monk, because obviously you haven't got a clue what you're talking about, because those are the only four possibilities. Either a being exists, or they don't exist, or they both exist and don't exist, or they neither exist nor not exist. So then Anuradha goes to visit the Buddha and says, well, there was this exchange that happened, and did I answer correctly? And then even though he was trying to defend the Buddha's approach or understanding, then the Buddha said, "No, Anuradha, you didn't speak absolutely accurately, because the way you spoke, it kind of implied that there was some other category that an arahant is born into, that's like a different one, but has just not amongst the four that you've mentioned." And he said, a Tathagata, he said, and then he kind of grills him and said, "So can you say that the Tathagata is the five khandhas, the body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness?" "No, Venerable Sir." "Can you say that the Tathagata is not the five khandhas?" "No, Venerable Sir." "Can you say that the Tathagata is in the five khandhas?" And they said, "No, you can't." "Can you say that the Tathagata is apart from the five khandhas?" "No, you can't." "Can you say that the Tathagata is all the five khandhas together?" "No, you can't say that." "Or can you say that the Tathagata is the owner of the five khandhas?" "No, you can't." "Can you say that the Tathagata does not own the five khandhas?" "No, you can't say that." And so then he says, well, so Anuradha, just as here and now, while the Tathagata sits in front of you, the Tathagata is unapprehendable here and now. How much more so after the body has passed away and that the life is no more. So Anuradha, now as formally I teach you dukkha and the ending of dukkha. That's what I teach, and so it's a very potent exchange. And so that this quality of unapprehendability, that you can't define that quality as a person. It can seem a bit sort of fussy. You say, well, he really was a person. I mean, he ate and he talked and he breathed. And let's be reasonable. But the Buddha was very reasonable, but also very accurate, and so this is something to reflect on and to consider, an important principle. And in a way, they're trying to define that awakened presence as something, and then similarly, when an enlightened being passes away, that there's some kind of super duper heaven that is nibbana, that the arahants go off to, which is like a really real top grade heaven that you can never fall away from, where it's really, 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 really nice. But there's absolutely no shred of that throughout the Pali canon, and the Buddha is very, very resolute, saying, the reality can't be spoken of. And there's another exchange where the Buddha is asked by this Brahmin called Upasiva, and he says, and Upasiva says, one who is an enlightened being at the end of their life, do they no longer are they somehow taken into some kind of perfect realm, or do they no longer exist? What's the truth about the destination of an enlightened being at the death of the body? And the Buddha says that which can when an enlightened being comes to the end of their life, then that which can be spoken of is no more. You cannot say that they do not exist, but when all that can be conceived or spoken of, so all that has come into being, like the body and the thoughts and feelings, no longer is, then that which can be, nothing can be said about that. There is no words or no concepts to describe what the reality is. So in that exchange, you cannot say they do not exist, but you can't use concepts or words to describe the reality. So it's very frustrating, because the mind likes to think in terms of a person, a being defined in space and in time and in identity. But the Buddha is saying, if you let go of identity, you let go of space, you let go of time. If the mind doesn't create those, then what is? You can't define things in terms of a localized being that's born and dies. Could you bring in a copy of the island? I'll read you the accurate passage from the Sutta to Upasiva, because it's worth reflecting on, because it also shows how much we like to think in terms of the five khandhas being real. I am a person, I am here, it's this time, it's 6:43, and it's a Wednesday evening, and here we are. Let's see. Upasiva. And so Upasiva asks, one who has reached the end, does he not exist, or is he for eternity free from disease? The Buddha replies, it is like a flame struck by a sudden gust of wind. In a flash it has gone out, and nothing more can be known about it. It's the same with a wise man freed from mental existence. In a flash he has gone out, and nothing more can be known about him. When a person has gone out, there is nothing by which you can measure him. That by which he can be talked about is no longer there for him. You cannot say that he does not exist. When all ways of being or phenomena are removed, then all ways of description have also been removed. That makes sense? So there's, if all means of description, there's a complete abandonment of time, location, and identity, if they've all been abandoned, then any way of description, any way of concept or word, that has gone as well. Or as Ajahn Amaro puts it, one who has reached the end has no criterion by which anyone can say that. When all phenomena are done away with, all means of speaking are done away with as well. So this is supposed to be mind-blowing. If your mind is going, huh? That's the exact desired effect. Because it's inconceivable. It can't be conceived. So where the mind goes, huh? Then that's in a way you're on the right track, because that the mind is always liking to make a conception. It likes to have an image, a form, an idea. Oh, that's what happens. And the Buddha is, at least in the Pali canon, the Buddha is extraordinarily resolute and clear about not making any kind of comment about that. And you do get a few hints though, and the passage that we chose to end this book with, Ajahn Amaro and myself, is one of the few places where the Buddha does speak. It makes at least a little bit of a comment about the nature of enlightened beings after the body has passed away. And this is after Dhamma, the Malian, he became an arahant when he was 7 years old, when his head was being shaved to become a novice. So he had a whole lifetime as an arahant. After he's passed away, the Buddha says, just as the born, the destination is not known, of the gradual fading glow given off by the furnace heated iron as it's struck with the smith's hammer. So when you have a piece of hot iron, it's glowing red, and as the iron cools down, the glow fades. You can't say where the glow has gone to. Just that you can't say where the glow hasn't gone someplace. Just as the born is not known of the gradual fading glow given off by the furnace heated iron as it struck with the smith's hammer, so there is no pointing to the born, the destination, of those perfectly released, who have crossed the flood of bondage to sense desires and attained unshakable bliss. So you get that one little comment, they attained unshakable bliss. So if you want to hang on to anything, you can hang on to that. But I feel it's more skillful just to keep the attention on dukkha and the ending of dukkha here and now, and not wondering what it's like for an arahant when the body passes away. It's far more useful, and that's what the whole mode or the method that the Buddha used, is trying to keep us our attention on the path, and then the goal to a great extent looks after itself. So I think that's enough from me for today. And so if anyone has any questions, things to clarify, please ask away.
Yesterday I was reading this passage in the Dawn of the Dhamma, and there's one at the end of the sentence. Ajahn Sucitto writes something found the true self, or this. What's that?
What's that?
You were reading it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because I think
Can you say it again?
the end of the sentence is something. He cannot do this, and he can also not. I would need to have the book, then I could find it. Maybe you can continue with something and I come back to that.
Okay, anyone want to? Silence is all right. Yeah, Lawrence.
Looking at you saying Ajahn Amaro and being with side effects of malaria and seems to be really biography Ajahn Amaro using things like fever just by using Dhamma through meditation. Interested to hear thoughts on that. How one could go about
well, there's a particular approach to practice with illness, which is called Dhamma Osata, which literally means the medicine of Dhamma. And I've not heard any sort of direct and detailed description myself, but Ajahn Tate talks about it to some extent, because in his autobiography he describes how he was diagnosed with bone cancer and was told he was going to die, and the doctors were trying various treatments and nothing was having much effect, and so he decided to see if he could cure himself through Dhamma Osata. And I haven't read his book for a long time, but my memories is something along the lines of, he went into this kuti and absorbed his mind in meditation. He didn't eat, didn't see anyone for about 12 days or a fortnight or so, and just using his powers of concentration and directing his mind towards healing the body. I'm not sure exactly what kind of practice that involved. Then he came out after that time and the cancer was gone. And he lived for about another 25 years after that. I think he was about 70 when he had the cancer, and he died in his mid-90s. And if you see pictures of him when he was very old, he looks very healthy. On a more mundane level, when you have illnesses or injuries, then the mind usually goes towards anxiety, worrying about what it's going to turn into, worrying about whether it's ever going to be cured, whether there's going to be some permanent damage. Fear. So the mind goes to fear and aversion. This is very natural. Aversion to the pain, resentment that you've got this illness or got this injury, and worry about what's going to happen or what's going on that you don't even know about. And so my experience with that is to be clearly aware. The more you bring the attention to those impulses, and you're fully mindful of that, and then choose to not follow those impulses of fear and aversion, but rather to relax the body, bring attention to the area of the body that is sick or is painful, and to spread loving kindness instead. And also to cultivate gratitude for the body and its healing capacities, and the body seems to respond very, very well. It's an interesting thing. It's a point that Lumpur Sumedho makes quite often, that having loving kindness for your own body is something that the body really appreciates. He said, like a dog is really happy when its owner pays attention to it. It gets all excited and cheerful when you kind of rub it on the head or give it a biscuit and take it out for a walk, and the dog is really happy. And our body is just the same. When you pay attention to it and you express loving kindness and gratitude, then it perks up and responds. And even though it might sound a little bit hokey, my experience is that is there's genuine effects that are there. Like a couple of years ago, when I was preparing to go off to Mount Kailash, and during the walk, both through the the training hike I did through the Atlas Mountains, and then walking through Nepal and into Tibet, through the Himalayas, there's a lot of times where you get these weird sensations of what's happening in my knee, or whoa, what's my back doing? Like, gee, what's going on there? And the mind immediately goes to, oh dear, what's happened now, or oh no, not my ankle, or whatever. And so I very consciously use this kind of practice. And whenever the mind would get worried or annoyed or upset, or I would deliberately bring attention to that part of the body, spread loving kindness, relaxing the body and bringing forth goodwill, and then also just cultivating gratitude to the body. So as things, particularly as things were recovering, or I say, oh, well done, yeah, good job. You're really great legs, and particularly to my lungs, because I had some breathing problems, shortness of breath and such, that I spent a lot of time expressing gratitude to my lungs and my good job, well done. Sorry, this is going to be a bit of a workout, so be prepared. This is going to be a tough one. Facing up some mountainside, you see a path winding up ahead of you, and even though it might sound a little bit superstitious, I can't help but say, well, the effects seem to be very genuine. And even though I was one of the older people in the group and extremely unfit when I originally started out, having a very sedentary life here at Amaravati, then I was really fine, and it was quite a striking opportunity to learn about the body and how it works, and that it really does seem to have a good effect. Whether that would cure bone cancer or not, I can't say, but certainly my experience is that simply not abiding in fear, not abiding in aversion, has a very direct and tangible impact on the body. And it's going to die one day. And so that's the greater framework that we all work with. But just also the subjective experience of the heart dwelling in loving kindness rather than dwelling in anxiety is much more pleasant abiding. So just to counteract those habits is very useful.
I found it, and also I can see that I didn't understand it.
Uh-huh.
No, it's sometimes with English grammar and German, I didn't get it, and
sometimes
many times I got it.
Okay, Ajahn Sucitto's grammar is sometimes a little bit.
I think it's this paragraph, right? It's completely clear suddenly.
Okay. Yeah, sometimes Ajahn Sucitto is totally clear to him when he writes it, but ordinary mortals can't quite follow. So there's nothing to ask on that for you? Okay, good.
It's not, after understanding it, I really like.
Well, in case you're all now, what is the sentence that she really likes? So the paragraph is the one that says, but for insight, one doesn't need to experience a great deal of calm or have lofty thoughts. Insight is based on looking into the way it is now. The more convincing and habitual the mood is, the less it should be heedlessly followed. The ordinary unquestioned habits and assumptions are the very ones that we need to see as impermanent, coming from conditioning and not from a fundamental self. So that was where I was talking about sexual desire or attachment to food, or thinking this is good, that's bad. As soon as the mind says, well, everybody knows that, or it's obvious that, or that wonderful word, actually, as soon as you hear your mind saying that, get suspicious. Rouse the thing. Well, wait, hold it. And just to take a step back from that, and to consider, why do I call this good? Why do I call this bad? And that things that we would call revolting and disgusting, that the flies are gathering around and say, "Whoa, look at that! Great, dig in." To a fly, something that is absolutely delicious and gorgeous and highly desirable to us is something revolting and disgusting. What is it? Is it revolting or is it delicious? Depends on the subjective experience. So, the ordinary unquestioned habits and assumptions are the very ones that we need to see as impermanent, coming from conditioning and not from a fundamental self. Otherwise, meditation becomes an irrelevant and fruitless hobby.